Well, here we are at a typical gravel pit. As you can see, probably one of the typical waters that you'll start your carp fishing on. Areas of gravel, sand, silt, shale. And whether you're an inexperienced angler or an experienced angler, sooner or later you're going to end up fishing waters like this. Looking here, it's a typical gravel pit. Large areas of undisturbed water. If you want to catch carp, the most important thing is the location of carp. For even with a great bait and a great rig, if you place it in the wrong spot, you're not going to catch those carp. So you've got to locate those fish. Now obviously if you know where the fish are, that's great. But for many of you, it's a question of sorting out where you think they are on the day in question. No obvious features to cast at, but there's one or two areas that strike me straight away. The quiet spots underneath the trees. Although it looks close in, fish will patrol these margins in that all the food blown by the incoming wind will be thrown against the side of here for the carp to feed on. So those are excellent areas to fish, especially with this nice warm wind blowing in. Further round from me, you've got the headland, the point as they call it. Anywhere where a point breaks the water will funnel away, driving oxygen into the water, and food will be laid along the sand's edges of the banks. Again, another excellent area. And if we go out towards the middle of the lake, although it looks totally featureless, because most people can't cast any further than 60 yards, if you can cast more than anybody else can on the lake, then that's going to be a hot spot. Fish under pressure will move into that central area, and if you can reach that central area, you'll often find fish stacked up there. So those are three areas, even if you don't know anything about the water at all, that you should look at. When the water's shallow and clear and you're fishing close in, you can actually see the features in front of you to fish to. As you can see from here, we've got a small clay mound, beds of weed and one or two clear spots. Unfortunately, not all waters are clear and we don't always fish at 5 to 10 yards range. Now, to find the underwater features that are attractive to carp, we've actually got to look towards a technique of plumbing and leading. And plumbing and leading is a way of finding the features that are underwater, the depths of the water and the nature of the water's bottom. And so what we need to do is get our plumbing and leading rods out. Before you start plumbing and leading about, it's vital to actually draw a map of the water so you've actually got some sight lines to mark for your casting. I always draw just a very basic map of the water showing the trees and any features I can see. As you can see from the small diagram there, we've got the pads, we've got the tree, and we've got the overhanging tree in the water. That means when I'm plumbing and leading about, I'll at least have something to cast at and judge me casting from. We've got the reflection of the telegraph pole on the water and that small clay mound in front of us. Eventually, after many weeks, months or possibly years of plumbing, you can build up a very accurate map of the water with depths, features, sight lines and such like. This is invaluable when deciding how to fish a swim. You pick the swim on what you think is the best swim in the day, but obviously having these features marked out in front from your previous work is invaluable in saving your time. It gives you a good starting point to start your plumbing and leading from. Plumbing and leading can actually be split into two separate factors. First of all, there's actually what we call leading about. This is the use of a bare lead. That bare lead is cast out onto the lake bed and pulled back at an angle. And by feeling the nature of the lake bed, it'll bump on the lake bed as so, and you can actually feel what is on the lake bed by the use of that bare lead. Plumbing is to actually find the depth of the water, so you know whether you're fishing 2 feet, 10 feet, or 22 feet. Now the plumbing setup in weedy water is as illustrated. We've got the bomb there to hold it down, 12 inches of nylon or dacron or heavy braid. This stops your float getting caught in that bottom weed. This is attached to a swivel, and then you've got your float. The float is as such. It's a centre drilled float, the line going through the centre of it. Obviously, the stop knot stops it going any higher. To increase the depth, you move the stop knot towards the rod tip, and to decrease the depth, you move the stop knot towards the lead. and by moving that stop knot up and down you can actually find out the depth. When the float shows on the surface it's perfect, when it lays on the surface it's too deep, and if it doesn't show at all it's not set deep enough. So you use both the leading and the plumbing to find out the nature of the lake bottom. To lead about, first of all pick your sight line, which in this case is the bush at the end of the island. Draw your rod back and cast out. As the lead hits the water, touch the spool and feel the lead going through the water. As the lead hit the bottom there, it kicked back, which indicates it's dropped in clear water. If I'd not felt the lead thump down at all, I would presume that's landed in thick weed and has absorbed the cast. But as it's thumped down, I'm sure that's landed on a clear spot. Tighten up gradually and draw your rod back at an angle like such. As you can see, that's easily drawing back. That indicates clear water. Tighten up again and draw back again. Absolutely no plucking of the rod tip or kicking. That indicates that area is quite clear. Still doing it. As that rod tip kicks back, it's picking up little bits of weed. So as we're coming closer in, we're actually picking up strands of weed. Now you do this for all the water in front of you that you intend to put a hook bait to. I've got in front of me here today quite a few books written on rigs. Now these are actually specific rig books. As well as this, there are columns each month, there are whole chapters devoted in books, and the worst thing is it gets more complicated each and every year. Well, don't worry, I'm not going to confuse you in this segment. I'm going to give you some sound advice. I'm going to show you some sound presentations and end tackles which help you catch fish, and I can assure you that if you copy these and use them properly, you will definitely catch fish. So what do we mean when we talk of the term carp rig? People glibly talk about carp rigs as though it could be anything. Are they talking about the lead? Are they talking about the tubing? The hook? The hair? Or what? There are so many different pieces that you have in your tackle box, and there's so many different pieces that go to make a carp rig. What we're going to do is cover two main areas, the end tackle and the presentation. The first end tackle that I'm going to describe how to use and how to make up is the one that we call the helicopter rig. As you can see, this is the one that's made up. You can actually buy them like this already made up, and you just need to purchase a bomb to add on, or you can make them up yourself. And if you want to make them up yourself, it's simplicity. First of all, you cut your piece of anti-tangle tubing to the length that you desire. Usually it's 12 to 16 inches, but you can have it less or longer as long as your hook length is not longer than the length of your anti-tangle tubing. Next, get your bead, push it over the tubing as so. Now sometimes you will have a problem getting your bead over the tubing. If you do have that problem, all you need to do is chop the end of the tubing down. It's a nice firm fit, but it will come off. Again, swivel and your final bead. These beads are made by Kevin Nash, but you can actually get beads made by Terry Eustace, Zen and Bodco's Rig Connection and Drennan. They're all good beads. So there you have the initial part. You then get your piece of link tubing, and that just pushes on the end like that. Dead easy. To secure this, if you want to make sure it's firmly fixed, then you can use a bit of the rig glue. You don't actually have to use specific rig glue, but the gardener glue is as good as any that I've seen. Just put a little blob just on the end of there, and that will keep the main tubing and the link tubing together. You then thread your line through your anti-tangle tubing, right through there, and it will come out this end. You tie the line to here, and then you draw them together as so. Push the link tubing over that, nice firm fit so it doesn't come off. Push your beads down a little bit further, and there you have the complete helicopter rig. The second of the end tackles that I'm going to look at is the one that I've called the Inline rig. Again, if you look there, you can see that's the standard Inline rig, 3-ounce coated bomb, length of anti-tangle tubing, and the swivel to which you add your hook link. This is even easier to make than the helicopter rig. All you do is push the tubing into there. Again, it should fit nicely. You thread your line through the anti-tangle tubing, that will take it through the centre of the bomb, will come out this end. You tie the line to the swivel, you push your swivel into there, and there you have a standard inline rig. As far as I'm concerned, carp learn by association, and when they've been caught a number of times, be it on a bait, an end tackle or a presentation, they will start to learn. And if you've ever actually seen a lead drop through the water, it goes through the water like that, it hits the floor, and your hook link naturally follows it down as so, and will almost inevitably end up next to your lead. Now, when the carp haven't been caught very many times, this won't make a difference, but after the carp have been caught a number of times, eventually you will have a lead like that with a hook next to it like that, and eventually the carp will start to scare off that. What you need to do is make your end tackle as subtle or as camouflaged as possible, and so I try always, no matter where I'm fishing, to camouflage my lead, be it green or brown or mottled, to match the lake bed exactly. Sometimes I'm fishing in weed, sometimes I'm fishing in silt, and sometimes I'm fishing in mud. So I obviously pick a colour that matches the lake bed. It might not catch you many extra carp a year, but even if it only catches you 1 or 2 of the cutest carp or the wary carp, and they're often the big ones, it's worth persevering with. So how do you go from that standard lead, as it appears in most tackle shops, to that lead there, which is a kind of lead, the kind of end tackle that I would ask you to use in your presentations? Well, it's actually quite easy. You can actually coat leads by using something that Terry Eustace and quite a few other tackle dealers have, and that's called the lead coating paint. This is quite an easy process, but it's one I've yet to get right. You heat your lead up as much as possible, and when it's heated up, you add the lead coating to it, and then that sets over it, giving it a lovely mottled effect. Well, unfortunately, I've tried this time and time and time again, and all I end up doing is melting the lead and ending up with a real mess. So I myself have come up with a special way that is far better with its simplicity itself. All you need to do is paint your leads to match the colour of the lake bed. The paint itself is available from any model shop, certainly Woolworths sell them, so you have 2 tins of paint there. Paintbrush, a file, some of Christen's hawser, a Stanley knife, and a bit of Drennan's elastic. This is a catapult elastic. The first thing you know is that on the lead that you get from the tackle shop, it's got tubing coming out of both ends. We don't need tubing on both ends, you only need tubing on one end. So all we need to do is purely and simply cut that off. Just be careful when you're cutting here, because these Stanley knife blades are very, very sharp, and you may end up breaking them on your fingers. Snap it off like that, and taking your nail file, just smooth it like that. That just takes the rough edges off it. So then you have the first part of the bomb. Next, using your Drennan feeder pult elastic, just cut the end off, and I've started. It's quite hard to cut through here. Always take great care when using a Stanley knife blade that you do cut onto a nice firm surface so that you don't cut yourself. That bit there, push on the end of there, nice secure fit. Now you'll have to hold the lead like that and push on nice and tightly. So in effect you've ended up with that. That's your first part of your rig. Then take your paints, give them a good shake, and then paint them to match the colour of your lake bed. Sometimes you'll be fishing on weed, sometimes in silt, and sometimes on gravel. So pick a colour that matches your lake bed. It doesn't have to be exact. A mottled effect like that is great. 2 or 3 coats of that and it's spot on. I think at this stage I'll actually describe the tackle that I use for fishing in weedy and snaggy waters. Now, don't be scared and don't be intimidated. Just because there's weed out there, it doesn't mean you can't use your normal tackle. Standard carp rods, standard carp reels, standard buzzers, and a good line will cover most situations. However, there are certain circumstances which actually demand you to use certain lines, certain rods and certain reels. I'll actually describe what I'm using because I've fished weedy waters and snaggy waters for years, and I think I can obviously show you why I choose these items. The rods are Daiwa amorphous. Although they're 2 3/4 pounds, you don't actually have to have a strong rod as that, but it needs to be at least 2 1/4 pounds test curve to land fish that are going for that weed. The reels are the Daiwa emblems. Now, you don't actually have to use a Daiwa emblem reel. The most important thing about a reel for fishing in weed, it must have a good clutch. Often you're holding these fish inches, if not feet, from the weed. You've got to hold them on a tight clutch, and if your clutch does not give up line, or if your clutch pays off line in jerks, it'll let you down. So it's important to make sure that your reel has an excellent slipping clutch. These do, and that's why I choose them. The buzzers are the Fox Micron DXRs. There are many buzzers around, and the most important thing about a good buzzer, certainly for fishing in weed, is they must be sensitive. There's absolutely no point using a buzzer that needs that much line to be moved before it indicates a response. That will let you down. You want a buzzer that indicates any movement at all, because though you could be fishing inches from the weed, and if that fish can get in the weed before you get an indication, you're going to lose it. So whatever buzzer you choose, whether it's a Fox Micron DXR or a Delkim, make sure it's sensitively set. Mainline is very important indeed. If you're fishing weed, as we have out here today, you need to use a mainline of at least 15 pounds. You cannot get away with 12 or 10 pounds. The fish will go for the weed and your mainline will part under pressure. That is ridiculous. You need to use a mainline of at least 15 pounds. This is the Berkeley Trilene XT, and although it's rated at 14 pounds, it breaks at not less than 17. Very abrasion resistant and is ideal. I either use a Berkeley Trilene XT, Nash's Power Plus or Silecast in 15 pounds. You can't use fine lines. I'm using the dual buzzer bars to hold these 3 buzzers. This makes a rock solid setup. I might be fishing at right angles to my rod tips, and I do not want the buzzer bar rocking and the rod falling off it. So it's important to use solid rod rest dual bars. At the back, I'm holding them with these rear butt grips. And as you can see, they're actually lined with Velcro. 2 sides of Velcro. I've got a Velcro there taped onto the rod handle and Velcro around the inside of my butt grip. They rest on top of each other like that and are a solid fit. Cannot be pulled forward, yet when you lift it up to strike, comes off cleanly. The problem with takes on many of these waters is that they drag your rod very quickly. If your rod shoots down, it'll lock up there and it'll shoot in the water, which means you could lose fish. So it's very important to make sure they're held securely, either by one of these or by a proper gripping butt grip. Although I'm using the swingers because I'm fishing at 30 yards or so, for very close range fishing, I actually use the standard hangers. As well as being aware of the tackle you need to actually fish with, it's always important to make sure you're set up correctly for the fishing. Have your unhooking mat out, have your waistling ready, your forceps, and of course your landing net set up. Do not ever cast out a bait until your landing net is set up. It could prove costly. Now, bearing in mind how weedy it is here, I obviously may have to go in for the fish to land it. So I've got 2 types of things with me. I've got the waders to slip into if I get a fish and have to wade out a little bit. But if I'm going to have to go in over the depth of my waders, I've got these cut down Wellingtons. I know it's only a little basic idea, but you can jump straight into these and straight into the water. You won't damage your feet, you may get your trousers wet, but at least you'll be able to play the fish in the water, because in this kind of weed, we may have to go in for them. Everything at the ready and no chance of disasters, which is how it should be for weed and snags. Providing you can find a fairly clear spot, it's worthwhile using the standard bottom bait. A lot of people automatically use pop-ups, but bottom baits are an excellent way of presenting a free bait to the carp, and that's where most of your freebies land. To make a bottom bait presentation is simplicity itself. You just use a standard hook, which in this case is a Fox Series 1, although the Ashima carp hooks are also excellent. We're using the Merlin hook length in either 25 or 15 depending how weedy it is. We're using unwaxed dental floss, either the Fox floss or your standard dental floss from any Boots or pharmaceutical store. To hold the liner, you can either use shrink tube or soft tube. We've got the boilie stops, we've got a knife to trim it all. To form the presentation is very easy indeed. Tie the hook length to the hook with a grinner knot. Form your dental floss hair and tie your boilie to it like such, and thread your liner-lined piece of tubing on as so. Slide the tubing down there. If it's shrink tube, add steam, or if it's your normal tube, just force it so the hook point and where the dental floss exits the hook are in line. And that is an excellent standard bottom bait presentation. Invariably, even if you do find a clear spot in your water, you will have to use a pop-up rig to combat any bottom weed there is present, because if the hook, the hair and the hook bait get caught in that bottom weed, the carp may not be able to take the hook into its mouth and will not hook itself properly. So we use a pop-up presentation. This is very easy to tie up and is very similar to our earlier presentation. You've tied the hook and the hook link together with a standard grinner knot. You've tied the dental floss hair, but instead of using a bottom bait, we've used a pop-up bait. Again, we've used either the shrink tube or the soft tube to form the liner, but this time we've added a counterbalance shot. This is a little piece of shot which is what you're going to mould your putty round. Some people are worried that shot may damage the braid. Now if you squeeze it on, it doesn't damage the braid, but if you bite it on, it does damage the braid. If you're still worried about it, you can always use standard power gum, which is available from Gardner Tackle or Fox Tackle. When you've slid your liner up onto the shank, so the exit point and the hook point are exactly in line, mould some heavy metal putty round that so it holds it on the bottom when you cast out. You will then have a pop-up presentation as such, ideal for the carp to find easily and hook themselves with. With the standard pop-up, you're just using enough putty to anchor your pop-up above the bottom as so. It really doesn't matter how much putty you use as long as your pop-up is held on the bottom. However, there will be occasions when the bottom is very weedy or the carp have got used to presentations where the bait is anchored on the bottom. For that reason, we use something which is known as critical balancing. The effect is you use just enough putty to negate the buoyancy of the presentation. So when you cast out, it sinks ever so slowly and rests on top of the weed as such. So when the carp comes along and sucks at the hook bait, because it's so lightly balanced, it will fly into the carp's mouth and is more likely to hook the carp. This presentation rests lovely on the top of light silkweed, and you're just using enough heavy metal putty to counterbalance it all. Whilst critical balancing is ideal on many waters as it holds the pop-up bait over the weed and will catch the carp out time and time again, when one method is used a number of occasions and the carp get caught on it, they learn to avoid and get ways round it. Now, one of the ways is they will regulate the amount of suck they use, and if they see that critically balanced pop-up moving as such, they may seek to avoid it. The way around this is exactly the opposite to critically balancing. This is called overshotting. In this way, you use too much putty to hold the pop-up down. So you've got a large amount of putty. This will hold the pop-up presentation as so, rock solid on the bottom. When the carp comes and sucks at this, it won't move initially, but when the carp makes a good effort, it'll fly into the carp's mouth as so. Because of the large counterweight, it will nail the hook point into the carp's mouth. This is a very effective way of catching the carp out when they've been caught time and time again on critically balanced baits. And it's a method that I would use on waters which are quite pressurised. Although the standard pop-up rig is a very effective presentation to catch the carp out, it does have one drawback, in that when the carp sucks the bait in as such, if it seeks to blow the bait out, as you can see, the braid is very, very soft and can crumple and leave the carp's mouth quite easily. To get round this, we have to stiffen the area between the shot of the putty and the eye of the hook. And this is done by using either super glue or Christen's hawser, hence the name hawsered pop-up. You coat that area in hawser or super glue so it is nice and firm. As you can see, it's so firm like that. Allow it 24 hours to dry fully, complete the pop-up, and you have it as so. When the carp sucks this in and tries to blow it out, because it's rigid, it cannot crumple down and is more likely to hook into the side or the top of the carp's mouth. This is a very effective method when pop-ups have been used time and time again on your lake. While soft and supple hook links are excellent for catching out carp in many waters, they have been used time and time again, and the carp do find ways round them. Now the obvious thing is to go exactly the opposite way and make your hook link as stiff as possible. You can use monofilaments, you can use the Amnesia heavy shooting mono, or you can even use the lead core. All of these make your hook link stiff, which means the carp have more difficulty in trying to blow out or get rid of the hook link. As you can see, a very soft braid like this can be moved as a carp extinguishes water, bits and pieces of mud, anything like that as it blows it out of its mouth. However, by using a very stiff hook link, it is difficult for the carp to compress and move that. And it is far more likely that when the carp takes the bait into its mouth and tries to reject it, that the hook point will catch in the carp's mouth. This is the Amnesia rig or stiff link rig. The one important part of this rig that many people forget to do is the loop at the end. This loop allows some free movement of the presentation, but not enough to make it rejectable. The stiff link, ideal for presenting bottom baits and balanced bottom baits, and one that should be used on your water if possible. It's important with all carp rigs, whether you're fishing a gravel pit, silty water, weedy water or snaggy water, to make sure that your rig is safe and sound. Always make sure your hook point is razor sharp. Use a hook sharpener, or if it's in any way blunted or rounded, retie and add a new hook. One of the big mistakes that I see many people making is when they've tied up their hook length as so, they hook it into a loop as such and pull tight. Now unfortunately, all the pressure is not on the knot, but is on the hook bend there, which means sometimes your knot is not bedded down. The way around this is to grab hold of your hook shank as such and then pull tight as so. The forceps are holding the pressure and all the force is on the knot. This will bed the knot down properly and you have no chance then of losing the carp due to a failed or slipped knot. This is absolutely vital when fishing in weed or to snags. Having cast the lead out into the right spot with the hook bait attached, it's now important to think about the bait you're using. The bait I'm using there is the chocolate malt boilie, but before you even decide which bait to use, you've got to think about certain things, and that takes us nicely into the section on baits. Never ever forget how effective a standard bottom bait will be on any water today. Most of your free baits are exactly like this and rest exactly on the bottom. So use a standard bottom bait on a bottom presentation as we indicated earlier. You can either use large baits, small baits or anywhere between. But whatever you do use, keep keep it in a pot so that you know exactly what kind of bait it is. Although standard bottom baits work well on gravel pits and weedy waters, you always have to remember that there is a hook, a hair and a hook length attached to that bait, so it is slightly different to the free baits that you've catapulted or throwing sticked out. To get round this, you can use a balance bait which puts an element of buoyancy in the hook bait. Very easy to do this. You can either use polystyrene, either cut or polystyrene balls or cork balls, which are available from most manufacturers today. Take a piece of the paste of your boilie and just roll it round the cork ball, as so. Once it's rolled round, roll it in your hands and you'll get a hook bait like that. Now that of course has got an element of buoyancy in it. You can then hair rig that onto your hook and it'll just rest above the bottom. The carp comes along, sucks at it, and because it's slightly buoyant, straight into the carp's mouth. When you're fishing a gravel pit or a silty water, it's important to make sure that the carp can find your hook bait. And one way of making sure that the carp finds your hook bait is to present it off the bottom, and that's by way of using a pop-up. You can either make your pop-ups as we illustrated with a balance bait, of course putting more buoyancy into the bait, or you can purchase ready-made pop-ups. Again, keep them in the tub so you know which ones are your bottom baits, which ones are your balance baits, and which ones are your pop-ups. The only problem with pop-ups in gravel pits is that because the water is so clear and the carp have the ability to see the baits, a bait which is presented 1 inch, 2 inch or 4 inch from the bottom is totally alien to the normal food the carp finds. All your standard free baits will be laid on the lake bed and your pop-up will be presented well above those. In a weedy water it won't show up so much, but in a gravel pit or silty water this will stand out to the carp. At first it may well interest the carp and catch them out on that alone, but eventually the carp will become wise to a pop-up showing like this and may seek to avoid it. So try and keep your pop-up as close to the bottom as possible. If possible, try and keep it balanced like that. In order to hook a carp, you've actually got to get it to take the hook bait into its mouth. Now, if you fired out 200 or whatever boilies and you've just got 1 or 2 hook baits out there, then your chances is 1 or 2 in 200. It's important to make sure that that hook bait stands out to the carp. And to make it stand out to the carp, you can use what are known as bait soaks. They obviously increase the level of attraction of the hook bait. You can use one of 2 methods to make a very effective bait soak. You can put your boilies in a bag and you can add the neat flavour, say 1 or 2 mils, to the bag, inflate the bag, shake them round, let the flavour soak in and use those as hook baits. Or you can use what is known as an overspray. You can put the hook baits in a bag and again spray that on them and that will soak in. You can either overspray your hook baits or you can overspray your standard free offerings, but clearly if you overspray your free offerings to make them more attractive, your hook bait won't stand out. But on gravel pits, and certainly in the colder months, a bait soak is very effective indeed. If your hook bait is exactly the same as your free baits, then clearly it won't stand out. The purpose of free baits is to attract the carp to feed in that area. Obviously, the more baits you put out, the more attraction you have for the carp. The problem is, if they eat all those baits or eat more baits, they may fill themselves up. To get round this, we use a process known as crumbing and chopping. That's exactly the same amount of baits, but we've chopped them in quarters, in halves, in thirds and in eighths. All the attraction will leak out. You've the same amount of bait there, but it's in little bits and pieces. When the carp swims along and these are scattered all over the floor, then your one solid hook bait is more likely to stand out and hook the carp. You can actually take this process one step further and crumb these down with either a liquidizer or your hands. Then you've got all the attraction of 100 or 200 boilies, but just a fine crumb with your hook bait standing out. An excellent idea to use in weedy waters, as these small bits of cubed and chopped baits actually rest on the weed better than the solid boilies. When you cast out your hook bait as so, there obviously is the attraction of one boilie only there. Now, to increase the attraction of the boilie, to make it more likely to be picked up, you can obviously use a pop-up, a bait soak or a larger bait. Another excellent way around this is by way of using a little trick of the trade called the use of the stringers. Now, a stringer is a line of baits on some PVA string. PVA string, hence the name stringer. All you need to do this is to get your gardener stringer needle and thread 1, 2, 3 baits on. Although I've only used 3 there, you can use 1 or you can use 20 baits, it really doesn't matter. Get your PVA as such, and the PVA that I'm using is a Chrysler Meltdown PVA. Hook that round like that and draw it through the boilies. This will then give you a little stringer of PVA'd baits. Cut off as so, draw them up to that. Then take the end of that, loop it over and pull it tight against it. Just leave a little gap of approximately 2 millimeters. Leave each gap like that, and there you have a PVA stringer. It's important to leave a gap between each bait, as this allows the water to attack the PVA and dissolve it. When that PVA dissolves, there'll be the hook bait there and 3 baits tight to it. The carp will then smell the attraction of 4 baits and is far more likely to pick your hook bait up. This is a very effective method in gravel pits and silty waters. Now you're aware of the different types of baits and preparations of baits, we now need to decide what's best for this swim. Really not what's best for this swim, but what's best for each and every rod. The left-hand rod might need to be fished different to the middle rod, which might need to be fished different to the right-hand rod. Each rod is in a different spot, and the baiting pattern has to be looked at each and every time. Because I'm fishing close in, I'm actually going to use crumb baits. Over one rod, I'm going to use ground bait. Absolutely superb, this. Ground bait is hardly ever used by carp anglers, yet it's an excellent way of putting quite a bit of feed in, but the carp actually can't find anything but your hook bait. So let's make sure we ground bait this area properly now. As you can see, the ground bait forms a lovely crumbing effect in the water. Nothing for the carp to feed on, yet a hook bait waiting for them. The purpose of free offerings is to attract the carp to your hook bait. Whether you're fishing at 2 yards range, or 22 or 102 yards, it's absolutely vital to make sure the free offerings do that. There is no point at all in firing them all over the place. Sometimes a catapult will be the ideal tool. Sometimes a throwing stick will be the ideal tool. But when you're fishing under 10 yards, you can actually throw the offerings out singularly, by hand. It's important that when you're fishing in weed, the free offerings drop tight to it. Those carp may be patrolling in very, very tight areas, and if your bait lands in the wrong spot, on the wrong side of the weed, it may never even find those free offerings and may not be attracted to the hook bait. So in weed and in snags, make sure the free offerings drop really, really tight to the single hook bait. There's no point either going mad and throwing hundreds and hundreds of free offerings out. You're only fishing for one fish per rod. It'd be nice to catch lots of fish, but if you can catch a single fish on each rod with maybe 5, 10 or 20 free offerings, that's excellent. There is no point firing out thousands for that red letter day, because often they don't happen. Be sensible with bait. When you leave the water in the morning or the next day or at the end of the weekend, fire your free offerings then to get the carp accustomed to that kind of bait. But don't go mad when you're fishing, because you've got to catch them when you're here, not when you're at home. When you're fishing at over 60 yards and possibly up to 90 yards, you want to make sure the free offerings you put out attract the carp to your hook bait and not away from it. So if your free offerings are landing all over the place and hardly anywhere near your hook bait, you're wasting your time, you're cutting down your chances. The throwing stick, absolutely excellent for putting baits out at range, but not always as accurate as people imagine they are. If you've actually practiced and can use one properly, they're great, but if you haven't practiced, it's going to cost you fish in the long run. Catapults. This is a fox pult. Very easy to use and very accurate up to 70 or 80 yards. I know people complain about catapults saying that they rasp the hands. Take a glove. This will stop you rasping your knuckles with that. Always carry with you spare pouches, spare elastics and spare ties, because if the elastic breaks halfway through a session and you can't bait up as accurate as you could, it's going to cost you fish. Be prepared for all circumstances. When baiting up, always take your time and be accurate with your catapult or your throwing stick or whatever you're using. Don't just rush and fire them out all over the place. One at a time and accurately at the marker. If you're fishing to a marker or to a specific mark on the pit, they want to be dropping no more than inches, at the very most 1 foot from the marker. Don't accept them flying all over the place. The problem is, with these very fine hook lengths and very small hooks and this pre-stretched line, there's not much give when you're playing fish, especially with a rod 2 3/4. So when the fish is lunging about like that, as you can see there, there's always the danger of the fish pulling the hook out. The trick, if there is a trick, I hope, is rather than trying to pull the fish in, is to lead the fish in, to actually guide it in. Let it think it's getting its own way a little, but actually to guide the fish in, especially when it's coming close in like this. Landing net ready. Try not to scare or spook the fish by waving the landing net in. You can see the fish isn't quite ready for giving up yet. Haven't seen the fish yet. Only a little bit to go. It's crashing about now in front of me. It's a nice fish. No need to rush here. This is when people pull hooks out, when they try and pull the carp onto the surface, because once the carp's on the surface, it in effect is a dead weight. Its weight is not supported by the water anymore. So you've got to be very careful at this stage not to go mad. You can see it's a nice comment. Still not ready. Still rolling. It's going to come above the net in a minute. Still not ready. Good fight this. That's it. In the net it goes. And that's the first fish of the session. We've been cast out, whoa! We've been cast out probably 3 or 4 minutes. Fish there, lovely common, probably well into double figures. What an excellent start to the session. Just shows if you get your baits right, get your rigs right, find where the fish are. It doesn't take hours to catch fish, it doesn't take days to catch fish. You can catch them as easy as that. Look at that fish and you think, yeah, but it's all right for him. You can catch these, honestly, dead easy. Fish is in the net. Let's make sure we get it all right now. First of all, make sure your weigh sling is on your unhooking mat and wetted. If you put the fish on a dry unhooking mat or weigh sling, it'll take the mucus off. Unclip the arms on your landing net. Put the landing net pole out of the way. Make sure the fish is fully supported in the net, still a bit lively. Keep it well away from that gravel and lift it up. Move your rod out the way. Fish goes onto the unhooking mat, as so. At this stage, the fish may still be very lively. Absolutely beautiful common that. Make sure your hands are wet. Absolutely gorgeous. Although this is called a common carp, for many anglers this isn't a common carp at all. Not many waters have commons, but this water is one of the unusual ones. Make sure your hands are wet and look where the hook is. The hook's come out of there and moved, so there's no way that I'm going to push that out with my fingers. What I'm going to do is use forceps to take the hook out. If you push hooks out with fingers, you can make a real mess. So, see the carp is lively there. Just grip the hook like that, gently tease it out. Be very careful when you actually lift the hook out that the lead doesn't catch on the fish and take its scales off. When you're fishing a gravel pit, you've got to be aware of how that gravel can actually affect parts of your presentation. Whether you've had a fish or just wound in, always feel the hook length and make sure it's not in any way been chafed or strained. Look at the hook and feel the point. Still razor sharp, no problem. If it's turned over, put a new hook on. Also, look at your lead. Coming into contact with gravel, it can actually chafe parts of your lead away. This coating protects it. I've run my fingers around it and clearly it's still all right. If there's any damage, it'll actually wear your hook length out. Little tips like that will actually save you losing fish. Now these kind of small hooks on gravel pits and silty waters, they can actually rip out of the carp's mouth. So when you're playing the carp, don't actually try and pull its head off. Try and lead it in gradually. It's going to come in nice and steady. I think the phrase is like a dog on a lead. If you try and pull it in straight away, all you'll do is pull the hook out of its mouth. If you take your time, almost like leading around, just gradually, just bringing it back nice and slowly. We're now getting to the safety point. As you can see, the shock leader is now almost on. It's almost on. Now we're fishing straight through 35 pounds. Fish is coming in, looks like a nice little common again. Take the time. Wait till the fish is beaten. Still not ready for the net. Let's be careful about where it's going in the margins. The problem is when they see this net in the shallow water, it's clear water here, it can scare them. Nice little fish. See the fish there saw the net. This bit of wind actually puts a bit of colour in the water, which is to my advantage. But it's still nice and close in. There we go. And still not ready. A lively fish. The problem with the fish is that when they actually get close in and the head comes out the water, the weight is off the fish. That is ready. Still won't give in, and it's now ready for the net and in. Another fish from a gravel pit. Again, another common. Probably about 12 pound, I would think. Buzzer's off. Yep, I would say that's about 10 pound or so. Another nice fish. Right, break the landing net down in the water. If you try and walk around with a pole, you're likely to end up snagging everywhere. Unhook your mat, still wet. Support the carp's weight, lift it up, right onto the unhooking mat. It's a smaller fish than I thought, still lively. It's about 8 to 9 pounds this. Called a common carp. Beautiful scalings on it. The fish is very confident. It's actually taken the bait right back into its mouth, so we're going to need forceps on this one. You can see how important it is to have an unhooking mat. The fish is still lively. Just support the carp between your legs so it can't go anywhere. A forceps grip the hook, just gently push it, lift it straight out like that. Nice and easy. Make sure the lead is well away from the carp, out of harm's way. Stop the carp flapping anywhere. See, the carp always wants to get back into the water, its natural habitat. Make sure it's covered in water. The rod out the way so nobody stands on it. And there we have nice little carp. One of the problems many anglers have when fishing these larger waters is actually reaching the distance. As we've talked about, the shock leaders, they do make a difference. But always remember, put your shock leader knot at the back of your spool. That means when you're casting out, the leader won't brush across that knot. Always put it to the back, wind the rest of your shock leader around the front, and when you cast, it won't flick against it. Very little handy trick which has just come out from Christon is this grease lightning. You actually just squirt it onto your reel line, let it soak in, And what it does, it lubricates the line, it puts like a sheen on it, and you can actually cast out further with it. I know it sounds silly, but it actually is true. It puts like a smooth sheen on it, and any abrasions on your line are taken out, and it often adds probably 10 or 15 yards to most anglers' casts. So if you're struggling to get those 10 or 15 yards, this can make a difference. It's very strong. Oh, which is with a small hook. I'm trying to be very careful, more careful than I would normally be. With straight through 15-pound line and say a 4 or 6 hook. Oops, and it looks like I'm going to get another one here, but that is going to have to wait, I'm afraid to say. Yeah, beautiful common carp here. Nearly scale perfect. I would guess somewhere around the 14-pound mark. Absolutely gorgeous fish, this. Now, the hooks, just to show you, the hook is actually fallen out in the net, which is incredible. That was a very, very lucky fish. Fish had been on probably some in the region of 10 minutes or so, and the hook's actually fallen out in the net. What a beautiful fish. Very light coloured one, this. Unusual. What a lovely fish. I would say about 12 or 13 pounds. Still quite lively. Always beware. They don't like the feel of warm hands on them. Even though your hands are wet, the light on them does scare them. Absolutely gorgeous fish. Beautiful gravel pit carp, and one everybody can aspire to catching. A real beauty. Now, a weedy water or a snaggy water can look very, very intimidating to even the most experienced of anglers. But if you take your time and think about what you're doing, there's no reason why you shouldn't succeed. Get to the water, look round, pick a swim for the time you have available, and at all times sit on your rods. The most important thing I have to emphasise is you cannot walk away from your rods. If you do that, a fish may well weed you up at any time in the day or at the night. So spend time sat next to your rods, put your bivvy as close to the rods as possible, and at all times, watch the water. And there we go. And that's putting the theory into practice. 18 pounds 4, left hand rod, about 10 minutes ago. Oh. Fish came from quite a heavy area of weed. One of the old fish by the look of it. Nice fish. 1 or 2 marks on the mouth there, so we'll just put a little bit of this clinic. This is something you all should have. It's like an antiseptic thing that you just put a little blob on the fish's mouth where you've hooked it, and it stops any disease getting there. There's a hook wound there. You can't just put the fish straight back. You do need to give it a little bit of time to dry. I usually give it probably 30 seconds or so. Just gently rub it in. It stops any damage at all to the fish. Always look at your fish and see if any of the scales have been displaced, knocked off or split. You can always add the clinic to that as well. Nope, that fish looked perfect apart from that. Nice result from fishing in the weed into the snags. And that's it, the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, the capture of the fish. A nice evening and a night's work. Lovely fish, 18 pounds 4. Now, you'll read in the papers about fish a lot bigger, 20s, 30s and sometimes 40s. But I've been fishing some time, and this fish of 18 pounds 4 gave me the rush that I look from carp fishing. Superb fish, and one I'll be pleased to catch for years to come, and I hope you will as well. Hope it's all helped you.